Welcome, everyone. Today, we're here to talk about storytelling as a strategic tool to drive commitment. Did we say, Ash?
Commitment and conviction,
And
yes.
conviction. Thank you. So, with me today for this conversation is Ash Seddeek. Ash is a leadership and communications advisor, speaker, and coach to Fortune 100 executives, founder of the Executive Greatness Institute, and creator of the Chief Excitement Officer philosophy and the Free Up, Think Up, Speak Up framework. Ash, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Kent.
Well, before we get into the topic du jour, I'd love to hear just a little bit more about you and your career story, or whatever wherever you want to start that.
Absolutely, yeah. So I actually came to the US on a Fulbright scholarship. I was going to become a linguist years ago. And long story short, I got into corporate settings, worked for Schwab, Deloitte, a number of high-tech companies, most recently Cisco. And Cisco's experience was the top experience in a journey that led me to pay attention to how language was such the main channel for leadership effectiveness.
Mm-hmm.
And ended up essentially leaving Cisco in 2015 and becoming a leadership communications coach, as you mentioned. And it's been a really wonderful journey to see how much difference it makes when leaders are able to speak with conviction and then help build that up within organizations, because conviction is wrapped up in building desire. And once people believe in something, then we see amazing things happen. And now there's so much that's happening in organizations where with AI, everybody's trying to build a vision for the future and how AI fits into that and how we can get everybody moving in that direction. So it's been a wonderful journey to see how we can help leaders do exactly that.
That's awesome. Well, and so we're going to talk about storytelling today, and I feel like it's come up a number of times in my career, right? And particularly in my time in HR. When I was most recently, I was with General Mills, right? And we talked a lot about, and they're obviously a giant, brand forward company, right? And so storytelling sort of at the heart of a lot of what they do. But even as I was talking with another leader recently at a much more quiet brand, right? They're not necessarily a brand forward household name, but even he was talking about, this element of storytelling, even in his role, and how important it is. So I feel like storytelling has come up more and more in recent years for me. And so, how did you get into storytelling, and what gives? Why is it so important?
I think what's happening today, especially with the fact that there is shortage of attention, I think across the board, we are getting so used to a lot of these digital devices, the phones in our hands, the social media, the YouTube shorts, that grabbing your audience's attention has become such a hard thing to do these days.
Mm-hmm.
And when you start with a story, you have a much more likelihood of grabbing that attention, because all of a sudden you're talking about something that has intrigue. All of a sudden they want to know what's going to happen next. And with that in your hands, you're able to then say, and let me tell you why this story matters. And you're able to then bridge over to the initiative that you want them to work on, the call to action that you want them to take. So I think that's really where I think there is a lot more interest in storytelling, because of the fact that humans are so much inclined to latch on to what
Mm-hmm.
happened to the story, what happened to that main character, and they want to figure out how do they fit into that story, so they can hopefully play a role in helping bring about the change and the vision that the leader is talking about.
Yeah. I love that. And I bet we're going to talk probably a lot more about where does storytelling come in with probably change management, so to speak, and how do
Agreed.
you get people on board.
Yeah.
But before we even kind of go down that road, interestingly, some of the work that I've been doing in talent management, we kind of ran into this issue with employees at multiple companies that I'd worked for, where there was sort of this myth for employees of like there's some secret plan that HR has for you in your career, right? So there was always this like, what's my career path? What's my, tell me what my career path is. And one of the best tools we had to bring in to help it sort of showcase it's all individual. There's no, hidden plan we have for you, was actually leadership storytelling, was actually bringing leaders in and having them tell their career stories, right? And just that aspect of career story is that aspect of storytelling, having leaders come in and just tell their own career story. And interestingly, hearing these weird left-hand turns and right-hand turns and unexpected opportunities when people kind of in their mind already had their own assumptions around, that this person must have had this perfect step-by-step
Yeah.
So I think there's so many pockets where storytelling
Yeah.
is really important. So where has your focus primarily been with storytelling?
I think you're totally right. For me, the focus has been around how leaders tend a lot of the time to come up with ideas, and then they show up on a Monday morning and all of a sudden they are talking about this idea and that idea. So, as I'm coaching leaders at Cisco, for example, I discovered that, of course, this is the tendency when you are a leader. A lot of the time, you have a vision, you want to change things, and sometimes these ideas are popping up much more frequently than we could imagine. And leaders tend to think that all they have to do is go in a meeting and share the idea. But of course, to your point about change management, they realize I really have to intentionally go about communicating the idea, but also coming back and saying, let me share with you how I think we can go about doing this, and then inviting everybody to co create those steps. And then now
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden, things are starting to look more concrete because we're thinking through the different impacted groups, and we're thinking through what that change means. And we're also hopefully going to come up with a phased approach to make it happen. Because, of course, as soon as you mention the idea, some people in the room are already having anxiety about it.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Because of course it's going to change the fact that they have built expertise in a particular area, and
Mm-hmm.
now you're coming and saying we're going to change that deck of cards. And
Yeah.
as soon as you change the deck of cards, it's going to go up in the air, and then we don't know where it's going to land. So they want you to show them that there is a conscious process for protecting and honoring the past,
Mm,
celebrating the present, and then thinking about how do we create a solid future.
yeah, yeah. So you're giving me this feeling like everybody needs to become a TED Talk speaker.
Without a doubt, I think it's a very important skill set to have,
Yeah.
because, to your point, a lot of leaders find themselves in this place where I have to energize the organization behind
Mm-hmm.
that future vision, and a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the time, the daily grind is in the way. It's like,
Yeah.
how do we take care of the business now as well as build the future business? So
Yeah.
there's always tension, especially among the leadership team, between where we are today and where we want to be. And it's
Yeah.
something they struggle with all the time.
That's a really good point, because I've been talking a lot about leadership transitions. It's a big focus of my own work in terms of people being promoted and how do you make that transition from one level to the next. And what is in my head right now is especially like people going from individual contributor to a leader, kind of the metaphor being, um, we promote people for their skill in one job and say, right, so the best salesperson, right, and the sales leader has moved on, and we're going to take the best salesperson. You get to become the manager, right? So we hire them for their sales skills, right? So I'm betting when you start to work with people that you get a bit of this, like, well, I was hired for this expertise, not storytelling, right? So I would bet even in getting people and working with them on their storytelling skills that you probably initially get a little bit of pushback. Maybe or is that changing also as I think maybe people are understanding more and more how important storytelling is. But so you tell me. I guess I would wager maybe earlier in your work more
You're
pushback, or do you
Yeah,
still
I
kind of
think
see
you're
that?
totally right. I think this really this really channels into the idea that, to your point, once they make that transition, there's so much that's being asked of them, and
Hmm.
then being able to strategically tell stories is another skill set that some may have, but a lot more that we can imagine probably need to develop.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it's like, oh my goodness, now you're adding this to the list,
Yeah.
you know. And
I've got to learn this too.
exactly, yeah. So I think we can definitely empathize, and I think we can say to our listeners, give yourself grace, because I love how in your business you give them like a 90-day plan. And within that 90-day plan, they can definitely take care of the essential priorities. And then at the end of that 90-day plan, we can then say, you know what, now we want you to take a deep breath and think about developing a vision for not just running today's business, but what does that future business looks like? And they can essentially, again, allow themselves to say, I don't have to do everything day one.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can start to build on what Kent is giving me.
Yeah. Well, so where do you tend to start with people when you start to work with folks on storytelling? You know, what's the kind of foundation for you? Where do you start with folks?
The foundation is to start with a vision by having them think about your strategic contribution to the business would be not about running the business as it is today, but looking and finding pockets where we could find incremental improvement in the business. And then maybe another bucket where there is a step change in how the business is getting done. And
Hmm.
it's an opportunity to increase their own relationship capital, because in order for them to develop that vision and do it in the proper way, it's not going to be by them going off to a mountaintop and thinking. We encourage them to do that, but we also encourage them to come back and say, I have some ideas. I'd love to socialize them and maybe have people shape things up with me, because
Hmm.
that's the magic way of making sure that as we are building the ideas, we're also building support and conviction to those
Yeah.
ideas. So that's really where we start. We start by saying, if this moment in time is an opportunity for you to do a reset on your leadership journey and the team that you're working with, let's think about where are things today versus where they need to be. His or her boss must have told him, we need to do this, we need to do this, we need to do that. So
Hmm.
there's already tension building up in the air on where things are at and where things need to be. So all of a sudden, this leader, in addition to managing a team of people, is also being asked to manage a transition in how the business is done,
Hmm.
which then creates, to your point about change management, it creates this idea that we need to lead change and manage change. And they are two different things. One is emotional, it's about building desire, it's about building conviction, it's about
Hmm.
realizing that people will resist the change and working through that emotional aspect. And then managing is more about, okay, we need to have a release plan, and we need to think, how do we cascade that out and make sure all the
Yeah.
people that are impacted by it understand why and all that stuff.
Mm. Nice. So let's dive in a little bit more too, right? So I know that you have done a lot of thinking in terms of kind of how you conceptualize um, storytelling, framing. So let's dive in a little bit. I'd love to hear a little bit more about um, kind of where you're aiming people and how you're focusing them.
Absolutely. So, one of the key concepts that you'll find me talking with clients in the very early coaching sessions is to, again, invite them, as we think about that reset, invite them to see themselves as the chief energizer for the organization,
Mm.
because energy is, again, one of those things. In addition to being short on attention, we're also short on energy. A lot of us are overextended. So I invite leaders to realize that we're going to have to get selective. We're going to have to get selective on activities that we do on a daily basis. We're going to have to get selective on initiatives that we're going to take on and really cascade things out so that we can have a reservoir of energy. Because as a leader, it's almost like you're the host of the party. If you are sitting in a corner and, you're tired, you're exhausted, people pass by you in that party, they can see you, it doesn't feel like a party. I mean, it
Mhm.
feels is like, this is like a week or something. So, in order for us to energize the organization, we're going to have to start with a few individuals in that organization. And one of them is definitely the leader of the group. Whether that's a he or a she, we want her or him to be the chief excitement officer. And the excitement here is not about taking care of sustaining today's business, which we have to honor and respect and
Mhm.
protect. But it's a lot more about the fact that you've been, as a leader, you've been to the promised land, you saw how things could be much better than today, and you are energized by what you've heard from people, what you've heard from your boss, what you've heard from the customers. And oh my God, can you just imagine what would happen when we actually get there? And then you spend some time explaining to people how beautiful life is when we create that new reality. So that's where then all of a sudden storytelling becomes table stakes. Because if you want people to be energized about what you're talking to them about, hopefully the story gives you the opportunity to say, let me show you where things are now, where things could be. And oh my God, I'd love for you to work with me and I'd love to work with you to make it happen. So it gets a whole lot more interesting and inspirational because of the idea that you're building excitement towards a better future.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like I've read that. So I know there's really good backing for what you're talking about. I can't remember what it was
Yeah.
exactly, but I know I read something some time ago now.
Yeah.
And this person was they were dissecting some of Martin Luther King Jr.'s speeches, in fact, right, and kind of talking about how he would kind of go between talking about the past,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
current situation, the struggle, how great things could be in this other potential future,
Yeah.
past, struggle, potential
That's
future, right? And how he would kind of build momentum and build a story. So
yeah.
that's kind of what I'm hearing here is you're kind of
Absolutely.
work.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely right on point. And there's a lot of Harvard research on this whole idea of energy and how much it affects everything else.
Mhm.
Because again, just by thinking about that party that I was describing, you can definitely tell. It will be a whole different party if the host of the party is all over the place and excitement, showing people where the drinks are, showing
Mhm.
people where food is, showing people where they can go out and hang out by the pool. I mean, it's a whole different vibe than the vibe where, oh my God, our boss is so tired. Don't even mention this to him.
So if I'm following you, I feel like maybe you're already tapping into, the free up space of your model, right? Free up, think up,
Yeah,
speak
yeah,
up. So what more can you tell us about the free up uh,
definitely.
part of that model?
So that model, and simply we basically call it the strategic leader model, whereby we're inviting leaders to free up in order for them to think up, in order for them to speak up. And freeing up, to your point, is about realizing that we're going to have to manage our time, we have to manage our energy, and we need to make sure we have about 15 to 20% of our time dedicated to thinking about what the future could look like.
Mm.
And that's what gets us to that second stage of thinking up new ways of getting customer service done, thinking up new ways of preparing our financial results, thinking up how can we prepare a much better dashboard for our leaders to understand where the business is at. And spending some time thinking up not just by yourself, as we mentioned before, but also hopefully with your stakeholders, your team members, so they feel like you're really making sure that they are shaping this with you.
Yeah.
And then speaking up is the idea of chief excitement officer, where you're going and you're energizing the organization about, yes, we have to honor the present. We've worked so hard to get here. I appreciate everything you've done. I see an opportunity for us to use AI to get us to much higher levels and open up windows for us where we can do amazing things for our customers. I need you on that journey. I need you to shape it up with me. So you feel like you have to do this on a constant basis, and it doesn't happen once. You've seen that happen a lot in organizations where, as a leader, you have to spend a lot of time going around. It's almost political canvassing. You have
Mhm.
to go to every town, meet the mayor, and talk to the people.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and so I think what I love so much so far about what I'm hearing is where this connects with a fair amount of executive coaching, to be quite honest, right? Like I think some of the starting places in some of my own coaching has to do with, and some of the I know critical conversations that I've had with multiple people that I'm coaching is how are you spending your time, right? So are you, and maybe even starting with the vision of, well, how do you want to be spending your time? What should you be spending your time on? What are you accountable for? Because even with, and I would say this is true of directors, VPs, even CEOs, is oftentimes people become the victim of lack of intention, right? And you ask them even to just do a scan of the previous 30 days on their calendar, and you compare that against, well, how do you want to be spending your time? And the lack of alignment, it's almost ubiquitous, right? This lack of alignment that leaders have between where they know they should be spending their time and how they are spending their time currently, right? So even in your model here, what I'm and I think you kind of honored this earlier by saying, I'm not just giving you a new thing to do. Like, let's not just become good at storytelling. It sounds like you're even, whether or not you're, to borrow from, Karate Kid from the 80s, right? You're kind of doing the wax on, wax off here of probably also getting them to be more strategic about how they're spending their time in order to. And I like what you said here, because I remember talking with a VP, even back in my consulting days, who was just said, like, I'm so busy, I don't even have time to think about. I'm supposed to be creating the new assessments, for the world, right, or what have you, and I don't even have time to think about that. I'm so busy, right? So I like how part of your model here seems to be, it goes beyond just storytelling, right? It is also, and I like the language you're putting behind it too, that is like creating space for strategic energy, right? Where are you actually putting your time and energy?
Absolutely. And I love what you're saying, because I think that what we would want leaders to think about is there is a difference between running today's business and creating tomorrow's business. And I usually put questions in front of people. I basically say, if the company today went out to hire somebody to run today's business,
Mm-hmm.
how many applicants would they get? And highly likely they're going to get a ton of applicants. But let's say we actually want someone to come in and create tomorrow's business. And we put the same job description out. The chances for us getting somebody who is going to come and think and envision and create something totally new, higher likely the number of applicants is going to be much lower. Because it's very easy to say, we need an accounting manager. We can look at the title and actually know exactly what's that about. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
if we said we need an accounting manager that can build the next generation of how we provide services for our client. I mean, that person at the beginning is highly likely going to say, I don't know where to start. And that's
Yeah.
unsettling. That's unsettling for a lot of people.
Yeah. Well,
So,
and I'd imagine, right, because we're bringing people up through certain functions, right? So, um, with the exception of maybe the finance side, right? I mean, there's always, there's enough stories of CFOs becoming CEOs for sure. But when you look at other functions, we never hire, with the exception of marketing, perhaps, and maybe depending on industry, we're rarely hiring people for storytelling ability, right?
absolutely, yeah, exactly. You want them to be so good at what they do, so they do it so well and manage the team so well.
Yeah.
And storytelling becomes a vehicle specifically when you are trying to help people envision something that's going to be coming up into the future. In
Yeah.
my mind, that's usually where it's going to be best helpful, is to help people envision, oh, you have a new process improvement that you want to make. You know what this would actually sound like? This sounds like we want to increase our freeway lanes. This is going to be the fast lane for a select segment of our customers. So not only stories, but as I just did now, I used a metaphor to get the point across that we already have 4 lanes. This is going to be the 5th lane. And it's not like
Mhm.
any other lane. It's going to be for our VIP customers, because we're
Yeah.
finding out that they're actually willing to pay more if they can get better, faster service. And then I basically look around the room and say, who feels that this is something we should do? And everybody's, oh my God, I heard from this customer, I heard from that customer, and this is going to give us an uplift on our margin about 15, 20%. You know what that means? This coming December will highly likely have a bonus for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. Love it. Yeah.
Amazing.
In my own head, I'm going to like my HR days of like, all right, we're rolling out a new annual performance review system. Boom. Like that's, versus, how painful the annual performance review is
There you
for
go.
everyone, right? Like there's, how do you grab people? I,
Exactly.
so I have a question for you, right? Because I would wager, um, particularly in our over connected world, um, it, I'd wager some of the advice when it comes to storytelling is, to maybe be more personal, right? To tell more of your personal story or your personal narrative. Um, but I bet that, so I'm guessing, right, that that's part of in your space, so to speak. But I'm also guessing that still gets a fair amount of pushback because I know at least with, we'll pick on LinkedIn for a minute, which I know you and I are both active on.
Yeah.
It's something like 1% of LinkedIn users who actually
Or posting. Yeah.
create content and whatnot.
Yes.
So I'd wager you get some of that pushback from people like nobody wants to hear my story, or I don't have a good, I'm boring, I don't have much of a story.
Yeah.
So how do you work with people on their own, those things that make them kind of
Yeah.
stuck and resistant to more storytelling?
That is absolutely true. In the beginning, they are wondering if they have any stories. And of course, what I encourage them to do is create almost like a story bank, a number of stories that are part of how they grew up. A very simple example I might ask one of the leaders I work with, and I would basically say, when you were growing up, did you at some moment get a bike? And they might say, yeah, yeah. And I say, what was that like? And they may have this exciting story about how they have been waiting for one for so long. And then one Christmas, they woke up, they walked downstairs, and right next to the tree, there was this big wrapping, and it looks like a box. Maybe it was a TV or something. I don't know what it was, but I remember meticulously opening up that box. So you can see the story, right? There is a
Yeah.
story here about building aspiration and
Hmm.
building intrigue and building surprise, and then finally getting what you want. And then you can immediately leverage that story. It doesn't have to be like, I know in the coaching world sometimes you hear people saying, you have to have an origin story. Maybe you were depressed and got better. And those stories are real.
Hmm.
But when we are trying to lead others, we're going to get selective again. And the story about depression may also be helpful at some moment if it has relevance to the
Hmm.
situation I'm in. I may be talking with one of my employees and I can see they are struggling with something, and I might tap into that. I might say, I've had some down days, and I wanted to check in. But otherwise, if I'm trying to inspire a larger group of people, I might tap into a different story. So
Hmm.
to your point, I think you have to get them to believe that the simplest story may actually be good enough for us to create something around it. Because one of the frameworks I have, it's a dramatic treatment framework where we do a little bit of almost like Hollywood style.
Hmm.
Where basically we take the same story and we say, we can actually tell this story in 2 seconds, we can actually tell the story in 5 minutes, we can make it a 15-minute talk. And we can essentially then, like an accordion, maybe either compress it or expand it. So depending on the situation, you can really dance with it.
Yeah.
You have to
Yeah.
be very clear on what point are you trying to make.
Yeah.
Like with the biker story, maybe I want to build the desire for something
Hmm.
and waiting for that day. And then you say, you know what? I don't want our customers to wait for that day for too long. That's why we're building that fifth lane.
Oh, I love that.
See?
That's nice. Yeah, I see that. Okay, well, so I'm gonna lie to you, and I'm gonna say I think my listeners want like give us two, but it's me. It's really me, because that was a very valuable. Like, ooh, how do I want to work my bicycles, my first bike story, or learning to ride a bike? What's two other simple, like typical childhood or adolescent stories that most people have that they could be thinking about?
I think graduation is probably one that a lot of
Okay.
people can relate to. We could
Yeah.
look for a graduation angle that
Hmm.
gives us this moment of getting to a point where we are finally at the point of celebrating our achievement. And I
Hmm.
can use this as a rollout date for our Salesforce initiative, our CRM initiative. And we talk about how beautiful that day can be, and then come back and say, in order for us to create that reality, what do we need to do in terms of go live readiness?
Hmm.
I can have like a whole day workshop where we spill out on flip charts how we will create the conditions for success for our go live. So I think graduation would be one of them. And
Can I pile onto that for a second?
yeah, please.
Because that makes me think of a couple similarly like a wedding, right?
Yeah,
And I'll explain where I think they're similar here. Is there's all this time one puts into thinking about now with a wedding. There's a lot more, obviously, a lot more planning for a lot of meticulous details. But
yeah,
in both cases, that wedding, graduation, um, it's over like that, right? You spend all this time thinking about it, planning for it, and the experience, is a moment in time, right? And so that just kind of
I love
popped,
that.
popped in my head of like, where could you mine the story of planning and prepping for a wedding, you know, in that way too. But
I,
sorry, I interrupted you.
I know
And
all this.
I totally put you on the spot too. I was like, give
Yeah.
me two, please.
No, but it's wonderful because I think you just shown the audience that it could be very simple moments in our lives where you
Mhm,
bring that moment up, and we would encourage them then to think about the details.
mhm,
Maybe it's the planning, maybe it's the guests, maybe it's the honeymoon trip,
mhm,
and you can pivot and say, you know what, when we create that fifth lane and we give customers that VIP experience, for them, it's going to feel like honeymoon because everything will be a whole lot easier for them to get what they want.
yeah,
So you can
nice.
always package it. And I think that's the message that you're sending people is that it doesn't have to be too hard to pick a moment in time and then
Mhm,
think about what lesson or message you want to get out of it so you can build on it. So that pivoting or that bridging over is what I coach clients on. Is we basically say, okay, let's pause and think about how are we going to bridge over to the point we're making.
yeah,
There
yeah,
may be a similarity that we want to pick out, and then show the audience how you can then pivot, because a lot of the time they might get stuck in the story, but we want them to tell the story just enough so they can bridge over to the point they want to make.
yeah. I love that. Like, I want to tell you a quick. I have to tell you a quick story now.
Please.
Uh, I'll try to keep it brief, right? So during the summer of 2020, right, height of the pandemic,
Yeah.
I decided to build um, a floating deck in my backyard, right? But um, my grandfather was a carpenter, right? Now I am not, but I'm plenty handy when I stop complaining. Um, and it was lessons learned from him of like, yeah, you can plan and you can design. At a certain point you just have to get your tools out and get started, and you're now, and then because even with all the planning you're going to get to a point where this isn't square,
Mm.
and frankly at that point you still might just need to get the sledgehammer out and pound the thing square, with a few good hits, right? And I think about that with rolling things out in any project, rolling out a project where, yep, you can think, you can plan it, eventually you need to get started,
That's
and
right.
be willing to tweak, be willing to make changes, be willing to grab the sledgehammer and just kind of pound that thing square midway through.
Yeah, course correct.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry,
That
I had to try out a
you
minute a
did. You
mini
did really well. You
storytelling.
basically showed people that you at some point you can do some course corrections, and that's fine. But at
Yeah,
some point you have to get the ball rolling. And I think that
yeah,
was the key message you were saying is at some point you're gonna have you
Got it.
have to step up and start walking ahead.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I love it.
That
Well,
was
I'm going to get us into the advice section here as we're kind of winding down. I think this time is flying, which I appreciate. So and I want to make sure I save some time too at the end of the advice column here because I know you've got a book you want to talk about too. So I always ask everybody to come prepared with a couple pieces of advice. So the first one is, what's one piece of advice you have for leaders?
I would say at least at a minimum, get yourself energized at the beginning of the day somehow. Whether you do jumping jacks or you take a walk outside, but for the sake of God, bring a little bit more energy into your conversation so that people feed off of you. It happens whether you want it or not. They're going to feed off of you. So if you come
Mm,
with your shoulders drooping and they can tell that you're tired, you haven't had a good weekend, it's not fair. Let's just be honest. It's not fair for everybody at the office.
nice. I'm gonna let me tag onto that because there's a he probably would bristle against being called a sales guru, but a gentleman I've become aware of over the last 6 months, Darren McKee. He does a lot of sale, a lot of stuff with sales. And one of his things is like, hey, before you get on that important sales call your best friend, call your wife or your husband, or call your mom or your dad or your brother, and like have a real uplifting
Conversation.
conversation first before
Yeah.
a call, right? So I like very similar, right? Like how do you
Yeah,
manage your energy? How do you
that's
be
that's right.
intentional, right? Right?
That's
Yeah,
right.
I love that.
Yeah.
So what's one piece of advice you have for those who support leaders, right? That could be HR, that could be senior leaders who are, coaching and supporting leaders under them.
I think this idea that we need to help leaders realize that they need to lead, not just manage the change.
Mm,
That basically means I see that you have back to back meetings on Monday, but then you also have this meeting on Tuesday where you're going to have an all hands. Highly likely you need a couple of hours to prepare your talk with at least one story that will be inspiring. So, you know what? I think I can have Sandy fill in for you in that meeting, and maybe I can have Jim take care of that for you because I think you're probably going to need that time. Because unless we nicely tell them you need to actually work on that talk, because that talk is going to become what I call an exponential value moment. In
mhm.
that meeting, when you speak, other people will be impacted. And you have to think about what kind of impact is this going to be. So, to your point, I love what you said intentional. You have to be intentional in thinking about, I want them to feel energized. I want them to feel like they cannot wait to get to that promised land. And I want them to feel supported. And therefore, my talk will create those feelings.
Yeah.
If I
Yeah.
don't have my slide deck or my talking points, well, you know what? I better get prepared.
Yeah, I like that. I think, what you're saying here is for senior leaders or HR to kind of give the leaders that they're supporting the permission, right? Give them the permission slash encouragement, right? Um, to be intentional about the role that they play in motivating, right? That, and I like how you kind of draw the distinction between managing change versus leading change, right?
Yeah.
Really kind of encouraging people to step into that leadership role.
So much, yeah, is dependent on that idea of
Yeah,
sponsorship.
yeah,
I
yeah.
used to work for ProSci, and a key statistic there is that sponsorship is one of the most important factors in the success of a change initiative. So that leader or leaders coming in and talking and reminding everybody of the promised land is 90% of how to get there,
Nice.
which is, which
Well,
is crazy.
yeah.
It's
Well,
crazy.
and I know you showed me a book earlier. So what's your book all
Yeah,
about?
so
Tell
the
tell,
book
tell us a
is
little bit about the book.
Yeah, so the book's called The Strategic Leadership Mastery, a 90-day planner for effective leadership and growth. And the key
Nice.
idea there is to do what we talked about earlier, just this idea of freeing up so you can think up, so you can speak up. What the planner does when leaders get this, and basically each page is an opportunity for them to have what I call a meeting with self, recommended on Friday afternoon. where you
Right.
think about yourself, you think about your team, your organization, and the business as a whole. So you're able to strategically think, because if you are in the grind of the daily business, you're not going to help the company as a leader. You're going to help them as a manager, and
Mhm.
they can find a pile of those outside the company if all they want is people to manage the business. Highly likely they want you to also help them create the future of the business. And that's where this is going to be helpful, because even if you just do one strategic thing per week, it's a whole lot better than zero or -5.
Okay, I love that. Well, where can people find that? And Ash, where can if people are interested in storytelling? But to be honest, from what I'm hearing today, is you're talking about a lot of stuff beyond just storytelling, right? And really kind of elevated into to the title of your book, Strategic Leadership. So, if people are interested in the book, if they're interested in working with you, tell us a little more where they can find the book or how they can find you.
Absolutely. So leadeffectively.co is one destination. And also we have communicatewithclarity.co is another destination for people. LinkedIn is fantastic. Ash at Executive Greatness is a very easy way for people to reach out as well. And you're totally right. I think storytelling is just the nucleus of doing so
Mhm.
much more.
Yeah, it's like it's the above the water of the iceberg, I think, in terms of what you've been talking about today, which I think is a lot of the below the water stuff that people need to attend to and be intentional about in order to lead instead of just manage, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Awesome, Ash. Well, I really appreciate you coming on today, and people can find you. I know I found you on LinkedIn as well, so I know people can find you there. Really appreciate you coming on today.
I had a lot of fun. Thank you so much for having me.
All right.
Thank you,
All right.
Kate.
Yeah, take it easy.